An elderly woman proposes to George Strait after learning about her terminal illness. George's response moved everyone to tears. The fluorescent lights in Dr. Martinez's office buzzed with an annoying persistence that seemed to mock the gravity of the moment. Dorothy Lawson sat in the uncomfortable plastic chair, her weathered hands folded neatly in her lap, watching the young Dr. S. mouth move as he delivered words that would shatter most people's world. But Dorothy had lived 78 years on this earth, buried a husband, raised 3 children, and taught countless others. She had learned that sometimes the most devastating news comes wrapped in clinical terms and apologetic expressions. "Mrs. Lawson, I'm afraid the results are not what we hoped for," Dr. Martinez said, his voice carrying that practiced tone of gentle authority that medical professionals develop over years of delivering bad news. The imaging shows extensive pancreatic adenocarcinoma with metastasis to the liver and lymph nodes. Given the advanced stage and your age, we are looking at a timeline of approximately 3 months, perhaps less. Dorothy nodded slowly, her steel-grey eyes never leaving the Dr. S. face. She had suspected this moment would come eventually. The constant fatigue that had been dragging her down for months, the 20 pounds she had lost without trying, the dull ache in her abdomen that kept her awake at night. They all made sense now. What surprised her was not the diagnosis, but how calm she felt hearing it. 3 months, she repeated, her voice steady as a rock. "Doctor, that takes us to early December. Will I have enough energy to attend a concert next month?" "Doctor..." Martinez blinked, clearly not expecting this to be her first concern. He had delivered hundreds of terminal diagnoses, and patients usually responded with tears, anger, or desperate questions about treatment options. But this elderly woman was asking about concert plans. "Well, Mrs. Lawson, that would depend on several factors. Your energy levels will likely fluctuate, and we should discuss palliative care options to help manage your symptoms. But yes, if you pace yourself and take proper precautions, attending an event might be possible. May I ask what concert you are considering?" A smile crossed Dorothy's face for the first time since entering the office. "George Strait is performing at the Toyota Center in Houston next month. I've been saving up for a VIP ticket that includes a meet and greet opportunity." She paused, her eyes taking on a distant quality. "I've been listening to his music for 60 years, Doctor. If I only have 3 months left, I want to spend at least one evening in the presence of the man whose voice has been the soundtrack to my entire adult life." Before you continue reading this incredible story, I want to take a moment to connect with all of you, amazing viewers. If Dorothy's courage in the face of such devastating news touches your heart the way it touched mine, please consider subscribing to our channel and hitting that notification bell. We share stories like this because they remind us of the extraordinary strength of the human spirit. I'd love to hear from you in the comments. Where are you watching from today, and what dreams would you pursue if you knew you had limited time? Your stories inspire me to keep bringing you these powerful narratives. Now, let us continue with Dorothy's remarkable journey. After leaving the Dr. S. office, Dorothy drove her old Honda Civic through the familiar streets of Cedar Creek, Texas, a town so small that everyone knew everyone else's business by supper time. She had lived in the same modest 2-bedroom house for 43 years, the one she and her late husband Robert had bought when he got his job at the grain elevator. The house sat on Maple Street, surrounded by a white picket fence that Robert had painted every spring until arthritis made holding a brush too painful. Dorothy pulled into her driveway and sat for a moment, staring at the front porch where she and Robert used to sit every evening, listening to the radio and watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of amber and rose. The porch swing still hung there, though she rarely used it anymore. It felt too lonely without Robert's gentle presence beside her. Inside the house, everything remained exactly as it had been when Robert passed 12 years ago. His coffee mug still sat in the cabinet, his reading glasses on the nightstand, his worn copy of Louis L'Amour novels on the bookshelf. Dorothy had never been one to change things just for the sake of change. Stability and routine had always been her anchors in life's storms. The living room walls told the story of her 78 years. Photographs of her 3 children, Michael, Sarah, and Jennifer, at various stages of their lives covered one wall. Michael lived in Oregon now, working as an engineer for a tech company. Sarah had moved to Florida after her divorce, starting over at 55 with a new career in real estate. Jennifer lived the farthest away in upstate New York, where she taught high school English like her mother once had. But the most prominent feature in Dorothy's living room was something that might have seemed out of place in such a traditional home. Covering nearly an entire wall was a collection of George Strait memorabilia that had grown over 6 decades. Concert posters from shows she had attended, album covers, magazine clippings, and photographs she had taken from the nosebleed sections of various venues across Texas. In the center of this shrine hung a framed photograph of George Strait from 1981, back when his hair was dark and his face unmarked by time. Dorothy had been 18 years old when she first heard Unwound on the radio, and something about his voice had reached into her soul and never let go. She walked to her bedroom and opened the top drawer of her dresser, pulling out a small metal box where she kept her most precious possessions. Inside, wrapped in tissue paper, was every ticket stub from every George Strait concert she had ever attended, 17 shows over 40 years. Some were faded beyond recognition, others crisp as the day she bought them. Each one represented a moment of pure joy in her life, a brief escape from the responsibilities of teaching, mothering, and caring for an aging husband. Beneath the ticket stubs was her savings passbook from Cedar Creek Community Bank. Dorothy had never been wealthy, but she had always been careful with money. Years of teacher A.S. salaries and Robert A.S. modest income from the grain elevator had been stretched and saved with the precision of someone who had lived through lean times. The balance showed $12,437, money she had been saving for emergencies, home repairs, or perhaps a small vacation she knew she would probably never take. Dorothy sat on the edge of her bed, holding the passbook and thinking about Dr. Martinez's words. 3 months, 12 weeks, approximately 90 days to wrap up a lifetime of memories, experiences, and dreams. She thought about her children, who would undoubtedly want her to spend every penny on experimental treatments, second opinions, and miracle cures that might buy her a few more weeks of pain and uncertainty. But Dorothy had always been a practical woman, and she had spent enough time watching Robert's final months to know that sometimes fighting death meant missing out on living. She opened her laptop, a gift from Michael 2 Christmases ago that she had finally learned to use with the determination of someone who refused to be left behind by technology, and navigated to the Toyota Center website. The VIP package for George Strait's upcoming concert cost $850. It included premium seating, a pre-show reception, and most importantly, a brief meet-and-greet opportunity with the King of Country himself. Dorothy's heart raced as she read the details. 5 minutes in the presence of the man whose music had carried her through heartbreak, joy, loss, and love. 5 minutes to look into the eyes of someone who had unknowingly been her companion through 6 decades of life. Her phone rang, interrupting her concentration. The caller ID showed Michael's number, and Dorothy felt a familiar mixture of love and anxiety. Her eldest child called every Sunday evening at exactly 7:00, a routine he had maintained since moving to Oregon 15 years ago. "Hi, sweetheart," Dorothy answered, trying to keep her voice light and normal. "Hey, Mom, how are you feeling? Did you get those test results back from Dr. Martinez?" Dorothy had mentioned the upcoming appointment during their last conversation, though she had downplayed her symptoms. Michael was a worrier by nature, inheriting that trait from his father, and Dorothy had learned over the years that too much information often caused more stress than comfort. "Yes, I got the results today," she said carefully. The The doctor wants to discuss some treatment options, but you know how these medical appointments go. Lots of technical talk and paperwork. What kind of treatment options? Mom, you see worrying me. Are you being straight with me? Dorothy closed her eyes, knowing that this conversation would have to happen eventually, but hoping she could delay it until after the concert. Once her children knew about the diagnosis, they would descend upon Cedar Creek like protective tornadoes, determined to manage every aspect of her remaining time. Their love would suffocate her last chance at independence. Michael, I am 78 years old. At this age, every Dr. ES visit comes with discussions about the future. I promise I'll call you if there is anything to worry about, okay? Right now, I'm more excited about something else. George Strait is performing in Houston next month, and I am thinking about getting a really good ticket. You know how much his music means to me. Mom, you shouldn't be driving to Houston by yourself, especially if you are not feeling well. And those tickets are expensive. Wouldn't you rather save that money for something more practical? Dorothy smiled despite herself. Her children meant well, but they had never understood her passion for country music. To them, it was just noise, a quirky hobby that their mother had maintained for far too long. They didn't understand that George Strait's voice was woven into the fabric of her identity, that his songs had provided the soundtrack to every major moment of her adult life. I've been practical for 78 years, Michael. Maybe it is time I did something just because it brings me joy. She paused, looking at the computer screen where the VIP package details still glowed. I love you, sweetheart, but I need to go. Give my love to Patricia and the kids. After hanging up, Dorothy sat in the gathering darkness of her bedroom, surrounded by the familiar shadows of a life well lived, but perhaps not fully explored. Tomorrow, she would face the practical realities of her diagnosis. She would call her other children, arrange her affairs, and begin the process of saying goodbye to the only life she had ever known. But tonight, she was going to buy a VIP ticket to see George Strait, and for the first time in months, Dorothy Lawson was going to dream about something other than doctor appointments and test results. She was going to dream about 5 minutes in the presence of a legend, 5 minutes that might just make the next 3 months worth living. 3 weeks later, Dorothy stood in front of her bedroom mirror, adjusting the collar of her best dress for the 5th time. The powder blue garment had been hanging in her closet for over a year, purchased for her great-niece's wedding, but never worn after a last-minute decision that it was too fancy for such an occasion. Now, looking at her reflection, she wondered if anything could ever be fancy enough for meeting George Strait. The dress hung differently on her frame than it had when she bought it. The weight loss from her illness had left her looking fragile, almost ghostly, but Dorothy had applied her makeup with the skill of someone who had been teaching herself to hide imperfections for decades. A touch of rouge brought color back to her cheeks, and her silver hair, freshly styled at Mabel's beauty parlor the day before, gave her an air of dignity that age and illness couldn't diminish. The past 3 weeks had been a whirlwind of preparation and family drama. Despite her attempts to keep the concert plans quiet, word had somehow reached all 3 of her children. Michael had called 6 times, each conversation more heated than the last. Sarah had driven up from Florida unannounced, staging what she called an intervention that lasted 4 hours and accomplished nothing except making Dorothy more determined than ever. Jennifer had been the most diplomatic, trying to understand her mother's decision, while gently suggesting that the money might be better spent on comfort care. "Mom, we're not trying to control you," Sarah had said during her visit, sitting at Dorothy's kitchen table with tear-stained cheeks. "We're trying to protect you. What if you collapse at the concert? What if you get lost driving to Houston? What if this George Strait doesn't live up to your expectations, and the whole experience is disappointing?" Dorothy had listened patiently to each concern, understanding that her children's fears came from love, not selfishness. But she had also lived long enough to know that disappointment was a luxury she could no longer afford. At 78, with 3 months to live, The risk of disappointment was far outweighed by the risk of regret. The ticket had arrived in the mail 5 days after she purchased it online, and Dorothy had carried it with her everywhere since then, tucked safely in her purse like a golden ticket to Willy Wonka's factory. The paper was thick and glossy, with holographic security features that made it shimmer in the light. George Strait, the king of country live at Toyota Center, was printed in bold letters across the top, followed by the date and time that had been circled in red ink so many times the paper was beginning to wear thin. Now, standing in her bedroom at 5:30 in the morning, Dorothy felt the first real waves of doubt washing over her. The concert wasn't a tea until evening, but the drive to Houston would take 3 hours, and she wanted to arrive early enough to find parking and navigate the venue without feeling rushed. Her hands shook slightly as she pinned a small brooch to her dress, a silver horseshoe that Robert had given her on their 10th wedding anniversary. The truth was, Dorothy hadn't driven more than 20 miles from Cedar Creek in over 2 years. The farthest she had ventured recently was to the regional medical center for her various tests and appointments, and even those trips had left her exhausted and disoriented. The idea of navigating Houston traffic and finding her way around a massive arena filled with thousands of people was beginning to seem less like an adventure and more like an insurmountable challenge. But as she looked at herself in the mirror one final time, Dorothy remembered something her mother had told her many years ago. Courage isn't the absence of fear, sweetheart. It is doing what needs to be done despite being scared to death. Her mother had said those words on the day Dorothy left for college, the first person in her family to pursue higher education. That same courage had carried her through student teaching, marriage, motherhood, and widowhood. Surely it could carry her through one final adventure. Dorothy picked up the small cardboard sign she had made the night before, carefully lettered with black marker on white poster board. The message was simple, but heartfelt. 60 years of being your biggest fan, 3 months left to live, one last dream. She had debated whether to include the part about dying, worried that it might seem manipulative or attention-seeking. But honesty had always been one of her core values, and if she only had one chance to meet her hero, she wanted that meeting to be built on truth. The drive to Houston began in darkness, with Dorothy's Honda Civic purring along the empty rural highways that connected her small town to the rest of the world. She had programmed her GPS with the arena's address, though she also carried printed directions as backup, a habit formed during decades of life before smartphones made navigation effortless. The radio was tuned to a country music station out of Austin, and as George Strait's voice filled the car singing Amarillo Morning, Dorothy felt her anxiety begin to transform into anticipation. The sun was rising by the time she reached the outskirts of Houston, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold that reminded her of the Texas sunsets she had watched from her front porch for so many years. The city sprawled before her like a concrete jungle, all glass towers and tangled highways that seemed designed to confuse anyone who hadn't grown up navigating them. Dorothy gripped the steering wheel tighter and followed the GPS instructions with the concentration of a student taking a final exam. Traffic grew heavier as the morning progressed, and by the time Dorothy reached the downtown area, she was surrounded by cars moving at speeds that made her nervous. Young drivers in pickup trucks and SUVs weaved between lanes with casual aggression, their vehicles towering over her small sedan like mechanical predators. More than once, she found herself in the wrong lane, forcing her to signal apologetically and hope that someone would let her merge. The Toyota Center emerged from the urban landscape like a modern coliseum, its curved walls and sleek architecture a stark contrast to the simple buildings Dorothy was accustomed to in Cedar Creek. Even though the concert was still hours away, the parking lots were already beginning to fill with vehicles bearing license plates from across the state. Families unloaded coolers and lawn chairs, planning to make a day of the event, while groups of women in cowboy boots and western shirts gathered around pickup truck tailgates, their laughter carrying across the asphalt. Dorothy found a parking space near the back of the lot, far from the main entrance, but close enough that she could see the Arena S marquee advertising tonight S show. The walk would be long, but she had brought her cane and allowed plenty of time. As she gathered her purse, her sign, and her courage, she noticed a group of younger women in the parking space next to hers, all dressed in matching black t-shirts with "straight to the top" printed in rhinestones across the front. "Excuse me," Dorothy said, approaching the group with a friendly smile. "I'm wondering if you might know where the VIP entrance is located. This is my first time at this venue." One of the women, a blonde in her 30s with perfectly styled hair and expensive-looking boots, looked Dorothy up and down with barely concealed amusement. "VIP? Are you sure you have the right ticket, honey? The VIP section is pretty exclusive, and it costs more than most people rent." Dorothy felt heat rising in her cheeks but maintained her composure. "Yes, I am quite sure. I have a meet-and-greet package." She held up her ticket as proof, but the woman barely glanced at it. "Well, bless your heart," the blonde said, using the southern phrase that Dorothy recognized as anything but a blessing. "The VIP entrance is around the side of the building. But honey, you might want to prepare yourself. The line gets pretty crazy, and it's a lot of standing around. At your age, you might be more comfortable in the regular seats." Now, the other women in the group exchanged glances and barely suppressed giggles, and Dorothy felt the familiar sting of being dismissed because of her age. It was something she had experienced more frequently in recent years, the assumption that being elderly automatically meant being incapable, irrelevant, or out of place. But today, Dorothy refused to be diminished by anyone's expectations. "Thank you for the information," she said with dignity. "And I've been attending George Strait concerts since before some of you were born, and I imagine I can handle one more." As Dorothy walked away from the group, she heard one of them whisper loudly enough for her to hear, "That poor old thing. Someone should probably call her family. She's obviously confused about something." The VIP entrance was exactly where the blonde had said it would be, marked by professional-looking signs and staffed by security personnel in black polo shirts. A line was already forming, despite the fact that the meet-and-greet wasn't scheduled to begin for another 4 hours. Dorothy took her place behind a family from Dallas, grateful to be surrounded by people who seemed kind and welcoming. But as the hours passed and the line grew longer, Dorothy began to understand what the blonde had meant about the physical demands of the experience. The Texas sun beat down mercilessly on the concrete plaza, and there was no shade to be found. Dorothy's legs ached from standing, and despite drinking water regularly, she felt lightheaded and nauseous. The family in front of her offered to let her sit in one of their lawn chairs, but Dorothy politely declined, worried that accepting help would somehow mark her as too frail to be there. By mid-afternoon, the line stretched around the building, filled with fans of all ages clutching photographs, albums, and handmade signs. Dorothy noticed that she was by far the oldest person in line, and she began to feel increasingly self-conscious about her presence. Younger fans chatted excitedly about George Strait's upcoming retirement, his recent album, and their favorite memories from previous concerts. Dorothy had memories that stretched back longer than most of these people had been alive, but she found herself reluctant to join the conversations, feeling like an outsider among people who should have been her community. A security guard named Marcus, a large African-American man with kind eyes and a gentle manner, had been walking the line periodically, checking tickets and ensuring that everyone was following the rules. During his third pass, he stopped next to Dorothy, noticing that she was leaning heavily on her cane and looking pale. Are you feeling all right? We have a medical station inside if you need to sit down for a while." "I'm fine, thank you," Dorothy replied, though she clearly wasn't "I've just been looking forward to this for a very long time." Marcus looked at her homemade sign and read the words silently. His expression softened, and he crouched down to speak to her at eye level. 3 months? He asked quietly. Dorothy nodded, suddenly feeling tears threatening to spill over. I know it sounds silly coming all this way just to meet someone for a few minutes. But his music has been with me through everything. Marriage, raising children, losing my husband. I just wanted to say thank you before it's too late. Marcus stood up and looked around the line, seeming to make some kind of decision. You know what, Mrs. Lawson, Dorothy Lawson. Mrs. Lawson, why don't you come with me? I think we can find you a more comfortable place to wait. He spoke into his radio briefly, then offered Dorothy his arm. And trust me, you are not going to miss anything. In fact, I have a feeling this is going to be a day you will remember for the rest of your life. As Marcus led Dorothy toward a side entrance she hadn't noticed before, she felt a mixture of gratitude and apprehension. She didn't want special treatment because of her illness, but she also knew that her strength was fading fast. Whatever happened next, she was about to come face to face with the man who had provided the soundtrack to her entire adult life, and that thought both thrilled and terrified her in equal measure. The side entrance led to a quiet corridor lined with framed photographs of various performers who had graced the Toyota Center S stage over the years. Dorothy recognized some of the faces, country legends, rock stars, and pop icons who had all stood where she was walking now. The thought that George Strait himself had walked this same hallway sent a shiver of excitement through her tired body. Marcus guided her to a small hospitality room furnished with comfortable chairs and a table laden with bottled water, fruit, and light snacks. Mrs. Lawson, I want you to rest here for a while. The meet and greet won't begin for another hour, and when it does, I am going to make sure you are one of the first people to meet Mr. Strait. I don't want to cut in line, Dorothy protested weakly. Those people have been waiting just as long as I have. With all due respect, most of those people have decades ahead of them to meet their heroes again. You deserve to have this experience without worrying about whether you'll have the strength to stand in line for 4 hours. Marcus pulled out his radio again. Besides, I have a feeling Mr. Strait would want to meet you properly, not rush through like the others. As Dorothy settled into the comfortable chair, she couldn't help but think about how surreal this entire day had become. 6 months ago, she had been grading spelling tests and planning lessons for her substitute teaching work. Now, she was sitting in a private room at one of the largest venues in Texas, waiting to meet the man she had admired for 60 years. Life, she reflected, had a way of surprising you right up until the very end. Meanwhile, 3 floors above, in the artist S suite, George Strait was going through his pre-show routine with the methodical precision of someone who had performed thousands of concerts over a career spanning 4 decades. At 71 years old, he moved with the careful deliberation of a man who understood the value of conserving energy for the performance ahead. His signature black hat sat on a nearby table, and his stage clothes hung neatly on a wardrobe rack, every detail perfectly arranged by his longtime tour manager, Janet. George, we need to talk about the meet and greet schedule, Janet said, consulting her tablet with the efficiency that had made her indispensable to his organization. We got 47 VIP ticket holders, which means we're relooking at about 2 hours if we stick to the usual 2-minute limit per person. George nodded absently, his mind already shifting into performance mode. He had done thousands of these meet and greets over the years, and while he genuinely appreciated his fans' support, the interactions had become somewhat formulaic. Smile, shake hands, sign whatever they brought, pose for a quick photo and move on to the next person. It was a necessary part of the business, but not necessarily the part he enjoyed most. Oh, but Janet, did Marcus radio anything about a special situation in the VIP line? I thought I heard something on the security channel earlier. Actually, yes. There's an elderly woman with a terminal illness who has been waiting since this morning. Marcus moved her to the hospitality room to rest. Apparently she's been a fan for 60 years, and this is some kind of bucket list thing for her. George paused in his vocal warm-ups. In his long career, he had met thousands of fans with various stories and circumstances, but something about this particular situation caught his attention. 60 years? That would put her back to my very early days, maybe even before I was really known outside of Texas. According to Marcus, she is 78 years old and has less than 3 months to live. She drove here alone from some small town east of here. Apparently she spent most of her savings on the VIP ticket. George set down his guitar and walked to the window overlooking the parking lot, where fans were still streaming toward the arena entrances. What's her name? Dorothy something. Dorothy Lawson, I think. I want to meet her first before the others, and I want more than 2 minutes. Can you rearrange the schedule? Janet looked up from her tablet with surprise. In all her years of working with George, she had never heard him request special treatment for a fan, no matter how compelling their story. Are you sure? It is going to put us behind schedule for the other VIPs. I am sure. Sometimes a person's story deserves more than a quick handshake and a photo. If this woman has been listening to my music for 60 years and drove here alone while battling a terminal illness, the least I can do is give her my full attention for a few minutes. 30 minutes later, Dorothy was gently awakened from a light doze by Marcus touching her shoulder. She had dozed off in the comfortable chair, something that happened more frequently these days as her body struggled to maintain normal energy levels. For a moment she was disoriented, forgetting where she was, but then she saw Marcus's kind face and remembered. Mrs. Lawson, it is time. Mr. Strait is ready to meet you. Dorothy's hands trembled as she gathered her purse and sign. Already? But what about all the other people in line? Don't worry about them. Mr. Strait specifically requested to meet you first. Marcus offered his arm for support. He wanted to make sure you had plenty of time to talk without feeling rushed. The walk to George Strait's dressing room felt both eternal and instantaneous. Dorothy's heart pounded so hard she worried it might actually give out before she reached her destination. Every step brought her closer to a moment she had dreamed about for decades, but never truly believed would happen. As they approached a door marked with a simple star and G, Strait written in black letters, Dorothy felt her knees begin to wobble. Mrs. Lawson, you are going to do just fine, Marcus said softly. He's a good man, and he is genuinely excited to meet you. The door opened, and Dorothy found herself face to face with Janet, a professional-looking woman in her 50s who radiated the kind of competent authority that comes from years of managing complex logistics. Mrs. Lawson, I am Janet, Mr. Strait's tour manager. He is very much looking forward to meeting you. I hope I am not causing any trouble, Dorothy said, her voice barely above a whisper. I know he must have a busy schedule. No trouble at all. In fact, he cleared extra time specifically for you. Janet led Dorothy into a spacious dressing room that managed to be both luxurious and comfortable. Leather furniture arranged around a coffee table, flowers from well-wishers, and the tools of a performer's trade, guitars, clothing racks, and sound equipment. But Dorothy's attention was immediately drawn to the man standing near the window. His back turned as he looked out at the gathering crowd. George Strait turned around, and Dorothy felt her breath catch in her throat. Even at 71, he possessed the same magnetic presence that had captivated her for 60 years. His hair was silver now instead of the dark brown she remembered from his early album covers, and lines mapped the passage of time across his face, but his eyes held the same warmth and intelligence that had always made him seem approachable, despite his superstar status. Mrs. Lawson, he said, stepping forward with his hand extended, I am George Strait, and I am honored to meet you. The simplicity of his introduction, as if she might not know who he was, struck Dorothy as both humble and endearing. She took his hand in both of hers, noting how warm and strong his grip was, how genuine his smile appeared. "Mr. Strait, I cannot believe I am actually here. I've been listening to your music since 1981, when Unwound first played on the radio. I was 18 years old, working as a substitute teacher and dreaming about my future. Your voice has been with me through everything since then. Please call me George and tell me about that journey. I'd love to hear your story." Dorothy had prepared for this moment for weeks, rehearsing what she might say if given the chance. But now that she was here, the words seemed inadequate. How could she compress 60 years of life, love, loss, and dreams into a brief conversation? How could she explain that his music hadn't just entertained her, but had actually shaped who she became as a person? "I was a teacher for 43 years, she began, settling into the chair George indicated. "Elementary school, mostly 3rd and 4th grade. And every year when the school year ended and I was driving home for summer break, I would put on Amarillo Morning and just let myself feel hopeful about the months ahead. That song became my anthem for new beginnings." George smiled, recognizing the deep connection fans sometimes formed with specific songs. "That's one of my favorites to perform. There is something about those lyrics that just captures the feeling of possibility, doesn't it?" "Yes, exactly. And when I got married to my husband Robert in 1983, we danced to The Chair at our wedding reception. It wasn't the most traditional choice for a first dance, but it was our song. We must have played it 1,000 times over the years." "Robert is not here with you today?" Dorothy's expression grew soft with memory and loss. "Robert passed away 12 years ago. Pancreatic cancer, the same disease I have now. During his final weeks, when the pain was really bad, I would put on your greatest hits album, and he would relax for the first time all day. Your voice brought him peace when nothing else could." George felt a tightness in his chest that had nothing to do with pre-show nerves. In his career, he had received thousands of letters from fans telling him how his music had impacted their lives. But hearing Dorothy speak with such raw honesty about love, loss, and the role his songs had played in her most intimate moments was deeply moving. "I'm sorry for your loss, Dorothy, and I am sorry to hear about your own diagnosis. How are you doing with everything?" "Some days are better than others. The doctors say I have about 3 months left, maybe less. That is why I knew I had to come here today, even though my children think I am crazy for spending the money and making the trip alone." Dorothy paused, gathering courage for what she wanted to say next. "Mr. Strait, George, I know this might sound strange, and I hope you won't think I'm just a foolish old woman, but I have one request that's a little unusual." George leaned forward, giving her his complete attention. "What can I do for you, Dorothy?" Dorothy took a deep breath, her hands shaking as she reached into her purse and pulled out a small item wrapped in tissue paper. "I brought this with me," she said, unwrapping a simple gold band, her wedding ring from Robert. "I know this is going to sound completely ridiculous, but I was wondering, would you consider having a symbolic wedding ceremony with me? Just for a few minutes, just so I can know what it feels like to be Mrs. George Strait before I die." The silence that followed seemed to stretch forever. Dorothy immediately regretted making such an outrageous request, feeling foolish and presumptuous. She started to stand up, ready to apologize and leave, but George's gentle hand on her arm stopped her. "Dorothy," he said quietly, "that is not ridiculous at all. In fact, I think it is one of the most beautiful requests anyone has ever made." He stood up and walked to his guitar case, pulling out an acoustic guitar that had obviously seen years of use. "If you weren't going to marry George Strait, even symbolically, then you deserve to have it done right, with music." What happened next would change both of their lives in ways neither could have imagined. George positioned himself across from Dorothy, his guitar resting comfortably in his hands like an old friend. The dressing room, which moments before had felt like just another backstage space, suddenly took on an almost sacred quality. Janet stood quietly by the door, her usual efficiency replaced by a sense that she was witnessing something extraordinary. "Dorothy, before we begin, I want you to know that what we're about to do isn't just symbolic to me. When someone has loved and supported my music for 60 years, when they've let my songs be part of their most important moments, that creates a real bond. You were not just a fan to me, you're a family." Tears began streaming down Dorothea's face, but they were tears of joy rather than sadness. In all her years of dreaming about meeting George Strait, she had never imagined anything like this. She had hoped for a quick photo and maybe an autograph, but here he was, treating her request with genuine respect and care. "Now, I am not ordained to perform real weddings," George said with a gentle smile, "but I figure if we're going to do this, we should do it properly. Janet, would you mind being our witness?" Janet nodded, clearly moved by what she was seeing. In her 15 years of working with George, she had seen him be gracious and kind to countless fans, but this level of personal connection was something entirely new. George began strumming his guitar softly, playing the opening chords to "The Chair," the song Dorothy had mentioned as her wedding dance with Robert. "Dorothy, would you stand up and take my hand?" Dorothy rose from her chair, steadier now than she had been all day, as if the emotional significance of the moment was giving her physical strength she didn't know she still possessed. She placed her small, weathered hand in George's larger, calloused one, feeling the same sense of rightness that she had felt when Robert had first taken her hand all those years ago. "Said Dorothy Lawson," George said, his voice taking on a formal but warm tone, "you have honored me with your love and loyalty for 60 years. You've let my music be part of your wedding day, your daily drives, your quiet moments, and your greatest joys. You've trusted me to provide a soundtrack to your beautiful life, and that is a responsibility I don't take lightly." George paused in his speaking but continued playing, letting the melody of "The Chair" fill the space between words. "I may be known as the king of country, but you, Dorothy, are the queen of my fans. Your dedication, your kindness, and your courage in coming here today inspire me more than any award or accolade ever could." Dorothy felt as if she were floating, suspended in a moment that existed outside of time and reality. The dressing room faded away. Her illness faded away. Even her grief over Robert faded into the background. In this moment, she was simply a woman being honored by a man whose music had given meaning to her life. "Do you, Dorothy Lawson, take George Harvey Strait to be your symbolic husband, to love and honor through music, through memory, and through the time you have remaining?" "I do," Dorothy whispered, her voice barely audible but filled with absolute conviction. "And I, George Harvey Strait, take you, Dorothy Lawson, to be my symbolic wife, to honor your memory, to cherish your story, and to carry your spirit with me for as long as I continue to perform. I promise that every time I sing the songs that have meant something to you, I'll think of your beautiful heart and the privilege of knowing you." George stopped playing and carefully set his guitar aside. "Dorothy, I don't have a ring to give you, but I do have something else." Away. He reached into a small jewelry box on his dressing table and pulled out a silver pin in the shape of a musical note that he wore on his performance clothes. "This has been with me on stage for every concert for the past 5 years. I want you to have it, so that wherever you go from here, you'll know that a piece of me is with you." Dorothy held out her hand as George pinned the small musical note to her dress, right above her heart. And Dorothy, I want you to know that a piece of you will be with me on stage tonight and every night after. Your story, your love, your courage, it is all part of me now. By the power vested in me by 35 years in country music and the love of the greatest fans in the world," George said, his voice growing stronger, "I now pronounce us symbolically husband and wife. Dorothy, you may kiss your country king." Dorothy stood on her tiptoes, and George bent down to meet her halfway. Their kiss was gentle, brief, and filled with more genuine affection than many real marriages ever achieve. When they separated, both were crying, and Janet was frantically searching for tissues while trying to wipe her own eyes. "Mrs. George Strait," George said with a grin. "How does that sound?" "Lati, it sounds like the most beautiful thing anyone has ever called me," Dorothy replied, laughing through her tears. But their moment was interrupted by a commotion outside the dressing room door. Raised voices, the sound of someone arguing with security, and then a sharp knock on the door. "George, I am sorry to interrupt," came Marcus's voice through the door, "but we have a situation. There are some people here claiming to be Mrs. Lawson S. family, and they were demanding to see her. They seem pretty upset." Dorothy S.'s face went pale. "Oh no, my children. They must have figured out where I went." The door opened, and Marcus stepped inside, followed by 3 people who were clearly related to Dorothy by their similar features and shared expressions of worry and frustration. A tall man in his 50s with graying hair led the group, followed by 2 women who appeared to be in their late 40s and early 50s. "Mom, what in the world are you doing?" the man said, his voice a mixture of relief and exasperation. "We've been worried sick. Sarah drove to your house this morning and found it empty, your car gone, and a note saying you'd gone to Houston for a concert. We've been calling your phone for hours." Michael, I turned my phone off because I knew you would try to stop me," Dorothy said, her voice stronger than it had been all day. "And I am fine, as you can see. In fact, I am better than fine. I just married George Strait." The 3 adult children stared at their mother, then at George, then back at their mother, clearly trying to process what they had just heard. "Mom, you didn't marry anyone," said the woman Dorothy had called Sarah. This is just a celebrity meet and greet. You're confused." George stepped forward, extending his hand to Michael. "Actually, sir, your mother and I did just have a symbolic wedding ceremony. It was her request, and I was honored to participate. Your mother is an extraordinary woman, and she has raised some children who clearly love her very much to drive all this way to check on her." Jennifer, the 3rd sibling, was the first to find her voice. "Mr. Strait, we're so sorry if our mother has bothered you or taken up too much of your time. She's been under a lot of stress with her medical situation, and sometimes she doesn't think clearly about appropriate boundaries." Dorothy felt her brief moment of joy beginning to crumble under the weight of her children's embarrassment and their assumption that she had somehow made a fool of herself. But before she could respond, George's voice cut through the tension with quiet authority. With all due respect, your mother hasn't bothered me in the slightest. In fact, meeting her has been the highlight of my day, and quite possibly my entire tour. She didn't cross any boundaries. She made a simple, honest request from one human being to another, and I was privileged to honor it." George turned to address all 3 siblings directly. "Your mother spent her life savings to come here today because she wanted to meet someone whose music has been important to her for 60 years. She drove 3 hours alone, waited in line for hours despite being ill, and had the courage to ask for something that mattered to her. Instead of being embarrassed by her actions, you should be proud of her spirit and independence." Michael started to respond, but George held up his hand gently. "I am not finished. Your mother just told me that she's been a teacher for 43 years, that she raised 3 children who are successful enough to drop everything and drive to Houston when they worried about her, and that she cared for your father through his final illness with grace and dignity. She is not confused or inappropriate. She is brave and loving, and exactly the kind of person the world needs more of." The room fell silent, except for the sound of Dorothy quietly crying. But these weren't the tears of sadness or embarrassment. They were tears of gratitude for having someone defend her choices and recognize her worth. "Now," George continued, "I have a concert to perform in 2 hours, and I want my new wife to have the best seat in the house to watch it. Janet, can you arrange for Mrs. Lawson and her family to have the VIP box right next to the stage?" "Of course," Janet said, already making notes on her tablet. And I want to do something else, George said, an idea clearly forming in his mind. During tonight's show, I am going to dedicate a song to Dorothy and tell the audience about the incredible woman I met today. Would that be all right with you, Mrs. Strait? Dorothy nodded, too overwhelmed with emotion to speak. Her children stood in stunned silence, beginning to realize that their mother hadn't embarrassed herself. She had somehow managed to create a genuine connection with one of the most famous performers in the world. "There is one more thing," George said, walking back to his guitar case and pulling out a newer acoustic guitar. "Dorothy, I want you to have this. It is not the guitar I played for our ceremony. I seem keeping that one because it is now part of my most treasured memories. But this one is yours, so that whenever you want to feel close to the music that has meant so much to you, you can." As George placed the guitar in Dorothy's hands, she felt the weight of more than just the instrument. She was holding a symbol of validation, of being seen and valued for who she truly was. After months of being treated as a patient, a burden, or a fragile elderly woman who needed to be managed and protected, someone had finally recognized her as a person worthy of respect and kindness. What none of them knew was that the story was far from over, and that the events of this day would set in motion something far more significant than anyone could have imagined. 2 hours later, Dorothy sat in the VIP box next to the stage, surrounded by her 3 children who had undergone a complete transformation in their understanding of their mother. The guitar George had given her rested carefully against her chair, and she wore the musical notepin proudly on her dress. The arena was packed with 20,000 fans, their voices creating a thunderous roar of anticipation that Dorothy could feel in her chest. Michael, who had been the most critical of his mother's decision to attend the concert, now found himself looking at her with new eyes. "Mum, I owe you an apology. I had no idea how much this meant to you, and I certainly never imagined that George Strait would respond the way he did." "He's a good man," Dorothy said simply. "I always believed that from his music, but meeting him confirmed it. Some people become famous and lose touch with their humanity. George has become famous and used it to amplify his humanity." Sarah, who had driven from Florida in a panic when she discovered her mother missing, reached over and squeezed Dorothy's hand. "I'm sorry I tried to stop you from doing this. I was so focused on protecting you that I forgot you were still capable of making your own decisions and living your own life." Jennifer, the English teacher, was perhaps the most affected by what she had witnessed. Mum, what happened in that dressing room was like something out of a novel. The way he spoke to you, the respect he showed you, the way he stood up for you when we arrived. I've never seen anything like it." Before Dorothy could respond, the lights dimmed and 20,000 voices erupted in cheers. The opening notes of Foolhardy Memory filled the arena, and George Strait walked onto the stage with the confident stride of a man who had done this thousands of times, but still found joy in the performance. For the next hour and a half, Dorothy watched the man she had just symbolically married command the stage with the ease of someone born to entertain. He performed hit after hit, each song carrying memories for Dorothy of different phases of her life. When he sang Amarillo Morning, she thought of all those summer drives home from school. During The Chair, she remembered dancing with Robert at their wedding reception. All My Exes Live in Texas made her laugh despite her tears, thinking of how she had always joked with Robert that she was lucky to be his only ex. But it was toward the end of the show that George did something that would change everything. The music stopped, and he walked to the front of the stage, his guitar in hand and a serious expression on his face. "Ladies and gentlemen, I want to tell you about someone very special I met today. Her name is Dorothy Lawson, and she is sitting right over there." A spotlight suddenly illuminated the VIP box, and Dorothy found herself bathed in light as 20,000 people turned to look at her. "Dorothy has been listening to my music for 60 years. She was 18 years old when she first heard Unwound on the radio, and my songs have been part of every major moment of her life since then. The arena fell silent, sensing that something important was happening. Dorothy is 78 years old, and she is battling terminal cancer with only a few months to live. Instead of spending her remaining time feeling sorry for herself, she drove 3 hours alone to Houston today because she wanted to meet me and say thank you for the music, but I am the one who should be saying thank you to her. George's voice grew stronger, more emotional. You see, Dorothy reminded me today why I do what I do. It is not for the awards, or the record sales, or the recognition. It is for people like her, who let music become part of their souls, who find comfort and joy and meaning in songs that help them through life's hardest moments. The audience was completely silent now, hanging on every word. Dorothy made a request today that touched my heart so deeply that I want to share it with all of you. She asked me to have a symbolic wedding ceremony with her, just so she could know what it felt like to be Mrs. George Strait for a few minutes before she passes away. A collective gasp went through the audience. And you know what? I was honored to say yes, because Dorothy Lawson represents everything that's good and pure about the relationship between performers and the people who support them. George began playing the opening chords to a song that Dorothy didn't recognize, something soft and beautiful that seemed to be coming from his heart, rather than his catalogue of hits. And Dorothy, this song is for you. I wrote it this afternoon while you were resting before the show, and I want you to know that you will be in my thoughts and prayers every single day from now until the end of your journey. But more than that, your story is going to inspire something bigger. What George said next sent shockwaves through the arena and would ultimately change Dorothy's final months in ways she never could have imagined. Starting next week, I am launching the Dorothy Lawson Foundation for Pancreatic Cancer Research. We are going to raise money to fund research into early detection and treatment options because no family should have to watch someone they love fight this disease without hope. Dorothy, you may only have months to live, but your legacy is going to help save countless other lives. The arena erupted in applause that seemed to go on forever. People were on their feet, cheering not just for George's announcement, but for Dorothy herself. 20,000 strangers were celebrating a 78-year-old woman they had never met, simply because her story had touched them through George's words. Dorothy sat in stunned silence, tears streaming down her face as she tried to process what had just happened. In the space of one day, she had gone from being a dying woman with a simple wish to being the inspiration for a foundation that might help countless other families avoid the pain she was experiencing. But George wasn't finished. Dorothy, I have one more surprise for you. Remember that symbolic wedding ceremony we had? Well, I've been thinking about the "till death do us part" portion of traditional vows, and I've decided that doesn't apply to us. Our connection is going to last far beyond your time here on Earth. He began singing the song he had written for her, his voice carrying across the arena with crystal clarity. She drove 3 hours with courage in her heart, 60 years of memories, a brand new start. Ask me for a moment, ask me for a dance, ask me for the honor of a lifetime as romance. Dorothy, sweet Dorothy, your spirit shines so bright. You've taught me about loving, you've taught me about fight. Though the road ahead is shadowed, though the time is running short, you are the queen of country music, you to my heart's truest port. As the song ended, something unprecedented happened. Without any prompting from George or the production team, the entire arena began chanting Dorothy's name. Dorothy, Dorothy, Dorothy. The sound was overwhelming, a wave of love and support from 20,000 people who had been moved by her story. George walked to the edge of the stage closest to Dorothy's box and knelt down, speaking directly to her through his microphone. Dorothy Lawson Strait, you came here tonight to meet your hero, but you've become mine. Thank you for reminding me what really matters. The final 3 months of Dorothy's life were unlike anything she had ever experienced. True to his word, George visited her every week, sometimes bringing his guitar to play for her, sometimes just sitting and talking about life, music, and the memories they were creating together. Her children, transformed by witnessing their mother as courage and George's response to it, took turns staying with her, finally understanding that their role was not to manage her dying, but to celebrate her living. The Dorothy Lawson Foundation raised over $2 million in its first month alone, as George's story spread across social media and news outlets worldwide. Dorothy received thousands of letters from fans who had been inspired by her courage to pursue their own dreams, regardless of their age or circumstances. But perhaps the most meaningful moment came 6 weeks after the concert, when Dorothy was too weak to leave her bed, but still alert and engaged with the world around her. George arrived for his weekly visit, carrying a small velvet box. "Dorothy, I have something for you," he said, sitting beside her bed. "I know our marriage was symbolic, but I want you to have a real wedding ring to wear for whatever time we have left." Inside the box was a simple gold band engraved with musical notes and the words, "Forever, my Queen of Country." As George slipped it onto Dorothy's finger, she smiled with the pure joy of someone who had lived fully and loved deeply. "George, I need to tell you something," Dorothy said, her voice weak but clear. "Meeting you, marrying you, having you in my life these past weeks, it has been better than any dream I ever had. But the most important thing is that you helped me remember who I am. I'm not just a dying woman. I am Dorothy Lawson, teacher, mother, music lover, and now, thanks to you, someone whose story might help other people find hope." Dorothy passed away peacefully 2 weeks later, surrounded by her children and with George's guitar resting beside her bed. At her funeral, George Strait arrived wearing his black cowboy hat and carrying his guitar, just as he had promised. He performed the song he had written for her, and then something happened that no one expected. He announced that he was adding a permanent dedication to Dorothy in every future concert, and that a portion of proceeds from all his remaining performances would go to pancreatic cancer research. "Dorothy taught me that music isn't just entertainment," he told the packed church. "It is a bridge between souls, a way to carry each other through the hard times and celebrate the good ones. She'll be with me on every stage for the rest of my career." As the service ended and people filed out of the small church in Cedar Creek, Texas, they carried with them a story that would be told and retold for generations. It was a story about courage, dignity, and the unexpected ways that human connections can transform ordinary moments into something extraordinary. Dorothy Lawson had gotten her 5 minutes with George Strait, but their story had created a legacy that would last forever. Sometimes the most powerful love stories aren't about romance. They're about recognition, respect, and the magic that happens when one person truly sees and honors another person's worth. The Dorothy Lawson Foundation continues to fund pancreatic cancer research to this day, and George Strait still dedicates a song to her at every concert. In the lobby of the Toyota Center in Houston, there is now a small plaque that reads, "In memory of Dorothy Lawson Strait, who reminded us that it is never too late to pursue your dreams and that true love comes in many forms." And in a small house on Maple Street in Cedar Creek, Texas, Dorothy's guitar sits in the place of honor where her George Strait shrine used to be. A reminder that sometimes the most incredible stories begin with the simple courage to ask for what your heart truly wants. The end. Esta história emocionante chegou ao seu final, mostrando como simples pedido de uma fã corajosa transformou não apenas seus últimos meses de vida, mas também tocou o coração de milhares de pessoas ao redor do mundo. Dorothy Lawson provou que nunca é tarde demais para perseguir nossos sonhos e que o amor verdadeiro pode assumir as formas mais inesperadas.